Lance Corporal Marcus Webb didn't whisper it. He spat it across Camp Lejeune's mess hall like a slur meant to leave a mark. Petty Officer First Class Vera Taskin was reaching for water when his hand slammed into her shoulder hard enough to send her stumbling forward into the table's edge. Her tray clattered to the floor, food scattered across government-issue linoleum. She was 29, wiry and sun-scarred with calloused hands that had done work most people couldn't imagine. Webb saw a sailor out of place, alone, someone who wouldn't fight back. What he didn't see was the small scar on her left forearm shaped like a crescent, surgical steel from a breaching charge accident in Helmand Province. He didn't see the way her pupils dilated and contracted as she cataloged every exit, every potential threat, every weapon within arm's reach. He didn't know that the woman eating alone had spent 6 years embedded with JSOC intelligence detachments, teaching SEAL operators how to extract high-value targets from places where conventional forces feared to go. He thought he was humiliating a desk sailor. He had no idea he'd just picked a fight with a ghost who'd survived 72 hours in a kill zone that should have ended her. The mess hall went silent. The question wasn't whether she'd respond. It was what would happen when the truth about who she really was finally came to light.
The August heat at Camp Lejeune pressed down like a wet blanket, turning the air thick and heavy with Carolina humidity. The main enlisted mess hall squatted near the barracks row, a squat cinder block structure that smelled like industrial bleach and reheated meat. Inside, fluorescent tubes hummed overhead, casting harsh light across rows of plastic chairs and laminate tables scarred by years of trays and elbows. The noise was constant, silverware clattering, conversations overlapping, boots scuffing on tile worn smooth by decades of Marines moving through. Petty Officer First Class Vera Taskin, 29, sat alone near the back corner with her shoulders squared to the wall. She always chose corners, always kept her back protected. Her tray held standard fare: baked chicken that had seen better days, white rice, green beans cooked into submission. She ate with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd learned not to waste calories or time. Her hair was cropped short and practical, dark brown threaded with premature gray at the temples. She wore the Navy working uniform Type 3, the blue-gray digital pattern that marked her as Navy rather than Marine, and a black dive watch on her left wrist, the face scratched to opacity from hard use. Her hands told stories if you knew how to read them: scar tissue across the knuckles, calluses in places that suggested work with tools, ropes, weapons, and a crescent-shaped surgical scar on her left forearm that she touched sometimes without thinking, a nervous habit left over from a breaching charge that had detonated too close in a Helmand Province compound 3 years back. She'd been at Lejeune for 2 months now, assigned as a training liaison under administrative orders nobody quite understood. Navy personnel on Marine bases weren't uncommon: corpsmen, intelligence specialists, various support roles, but Taskin didn't fit the usual patterns. She reported to a Marine major who worked out of the G2 intelligence shop, handled vague training coordination duties, and kept to herself in ways that made people notice by not noticing. If you're watching from somewhere near North Carolina or any military town tonight, you know this type: the quiet ones who carry themselves differently, who seem to occupy space without demanding it. If this story resonates, consider subscribing to Military Stories. We tell the stories the system doesn't want to tell. Lance Corporal Marcus Webb had been watching her for weeks. He was 24, built like someone who spent more time perfecting his physique than his professionalism. With a regulation high and tight and a mouth that wrote checks his experience couldn't cash, he had 2 deployments: one to Okinawa doing training rotations, one to Djibouti pulling convoy security, and an ego inflated beyond what those deployments justified. What bothered him most wasn't that Taskin was Navy. It was that she walked past him in passageways without acknowledging his existence, without the deference he thought he'd earned. The crescent scar on her forearm caught light sometimes when she moved. She never explained it. The few people who'd asked got polite deflections and subject changes. Most stopped asking.
Vera Taskin grew up in Kingman, Arizona, in a double-wide that smelled like gun solvent in her father's Camels.
Daniel Taskin had been force reconnaissance in the 1980s, back before the term Marine Raider was resurrected, when recon Marines did the jobs that didn't make it into official reports. He'd come home from Lebanon and Grenada, carrying weight that never fully lifted. He worked long-haul trucking routes and spent weekends teaching his daughter things most fathers didn't: land navigation by stars, weapon maintenance in the dark, how to think tactically when everything went wrong. He never told war stories. He taught principles. Don't assume backup is coming. Don't trust equipment you haven't personally checked. Don't ever believe someone will save you just because they should. By 16, Vera could field strip an M4 blindfolded and run 12 miles with a weighted pack without complaint. Her mother had left when she was 9, couldn't handle Daniel's silences and the ghosts he carried. After that, it was just the two of them, and he raised her the only way he knew how. She enlisted at 18, not because she needed direction, but because her father told her once that the only way to discover what you were made of was to be tested by people who didn't care whether you passed. She went to the Navy, chose cryptologic technician for the clearances and the challenge, and spent her first 3 years doing signals intelligence work aboard destroyers and at shore stations. That was when someone from JSOC's intelligence support activity found her. They never gave full names, just showed up after a training evolution where she'd identified a pattern in communications intercepts that 3 senior analysts had missed. They asked if she wanted to do work that mattered, work that would never appear in any official record, work that would test every assumption she had about her own limits. She said yes. The next 6 years erased any illusions about what intelligence work meant at the operational level. She wasn't analyzing signals from a safe room anymore. She was on the ground with SEAL elements and Army Special Mission units, providing real-time intelligence support in denied areas where one mistake meant capture or death. She learned to breach doors because operators needed extra hands, learned combat casualty care because medics couldn't be everywhere, learned to move, shoot, and communicate like someone whose life depended on it, because it did. Helmand Province, 2021. A 4-man SEAL element in Taskin inserted to extract a high-value target with intelligence on an imminent attack against U.S. forces in Kabul. The mission went sideways when local militia surrounded the compound and cut off extraction routes. They held that compound for 72 hours against overwhelming numbers, rationing ammunition and water, treating wounds with whatever they could improvise. Taskin took shrapnel from a breaching charge that cooked off during an attempted breach. The crescent scar on her forearm was the only visible reminder. All 5 made it out. The HVT made it out. The attack in Kabul was prevented. Lieutenant Marcus Brooks, the SEAL element leader, didn't make it out of Ramadi 8 months later. IED on a convoy route. Taskin got the notification through unofficial channels. Her work was too classified for official casualty reporting. She carried Brooks with her. Not guilt exactly, but weight. The kind that accumulates when you survive situations where others don't. After Brooks died, she requested rotation out of the JSOC detachment, told her handler she was done operating in places that didn't officially exist. They processed her transfer with a cover story about training liaison duties and sent her to Camp Lejeune with a sanitized service record that said nothing about the previous 6 years. The deal she made with herself was simple: keep her head down, do administrative work nobody cared about, and try to be something other than a weapon until her 20 years were up and she could disappear completely. Then Marcus Webb decided she needed to be reminded that women didn't belong in his Marine Corps.
Marcus Webb wasn't born cruel. He was manufactured that way by a father who measured worth in physical dominance and an older brother who'd made it through Marine Raider selection and never let Marcus forget it. Webb had grown up in that shadow, learned to throw punches before he learned fractions, and carried that mentality straight through Paris Island and into the Fleet Marine Force with the desperate hunger of someone trying to prove something to people who'd stopped watching. His 2 deployments, Okinawa and Djibouti, had been operationally quiet. Training exercises and convoy security, nothing that tested him the way he'd imagined combat would, nothing that gave him the validation he craved. So he'd built his identity around the gym, around volume, around surrounding himself with junior Marines who mistook his aggression for leadership. When Petty Officer First Class Vera Taskin showed up 2 months ago,
Quiet, self-contained, utterly unimpressed by his presence, something in him fractured. It started small, comments in passageways just loud enough for her to hear. She's a squid on a Marine base, probably never left a nice, safe ship. Bet she thinks she's special. Webb had 2 other lance corporals in his orbit, Daniels and Co., who laughed on cue and played their supporting roles. They'd shoulder check her in the corridors, block her path at the post exchange. Small violations designed to establish hierarchy without crossing lines that would trigger official complaints. Taskin never responded. That was what led Webb to escalation. She just looked through him with eyes that seemed to calculate trajectories and distances and threat assessments, then moved past like he was weather. No anger, no fear, just flat evaluation that made him feel measured and dismissed. The mess hall incident was deliberate. Webb planned it, waited until the room was crowded and made sure people were watching. When he shoved her and her tray crashed to the floor, when he said those words loud enough to carry across the entire space, he expected a reaction. Tears, anger he could leverage into further humiliation. Instead, Taskin stood slowly, brushed rice off her NWU, and held his gaze for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. She didn't say a word, just turned and walked out with the kind of control that suggested violence was a choice she was actively declining. The mess hall stayed quiet for a beat. Then the noise returned, but muted. Staff Sergeant Clayton Morris, a combat engineer with 2 Fallujah deployments sitting 3 tables over, didn't laugh. Morris had worked with JSOC personnel in Iraq. He recognized something in the way Taskin moved, the situational awareness, the economy of motion, the way she'd cataloged the entire room before sitting down. He didn't know his story, but he knew enough to be concerned. The next morning, Webb and his crew were in the base gym when Taskin came in for her daily PT. She ignored them completely, just moved to the pull-up bar and started her sets. 20 dead-hang pull-ups without kipping, smooth and controlled, barely breathing hard. Webb watched from the bench press, felt his face heat with something that wasn't quite anger, but close, and made a decision. He approached her while she was hydrating between sets, told her Navy support personnel should know their place, told her she was taking up space real Marines needed, told her if she couldn't handle Marine Corps culture, maybe she should request transfer back to a ship where she'd be safe. He said it loud enough that everyone in the gym heard clearly. Taskin drank her water, looked at him the way you'd look at a training problem you'd solved years ago. Then she went back to her pull-ups without acknowledging he'd spoken. Webb felt something crack inside his chest. Humiliation mixed with rage, mixed with confusion about why his intimidation wasn't working. He started planning something bigger, something that would force a response. He never got the chance.
That afternoon, Captain Vincent Reeves, the company commander, called a mandatory company formation for the following morning. Reeves was a prior enlisted Mustang who had done time in force recon before commissioning, and he had the kind of presence that made Marines straighten spines without raising his voice. He didn't explain the formation's purpose, just said attendance was mandatory and non-negotiable. Taskin sat on her rack that night in the mostly empty barracks berthing area, still in her PT gear. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and decades of accumulated sweat. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the effort required to maintain control when every operational instinct screamed at her to respond. She could have ended Webb in the mess hall, could have applied any of 24 techniques drilled into her over 6 years of close-quarters combat training, could have made him understand exactly how badly he'd miscalculated. But that wasn't the agreement she'd made with herself when she left the JSOC detachment. No more violence, no more operating in denied areas, just quiet administrative work until her service obligation ended and she could disappear into a civilian life that didn't require constant threat assessment. She pulled off her dive watch and set it carefully on the wall locker. The crystal was scratched, nearly opaque from years of hard use. She'd worn it in Helmand when she'd helped a SEAL platoon develop breach plans for hardened compounds. Worn it in Yemen during a 72-hour siege that should have killed everyone involved. Worn it in Ramadi the day she got word that Brooks was dead. Brooks used to tell her that the hardest part of their work wasn't the danger. It was coming back afterward and pretending you were normal. Pretending you hadn't done things and seen things that would give ordinary people nightmares for years. He'd said the trick was finding a line you wouldn't cross,
some boundary that defined who you were beyond the operational requirements, and holding that line no matter what pressure got applied. She thought walking away from JSOC was that line, thought that if she could just be a regular petty officer first class doing regular liaison work, she could bury Helmand and Yemen deep enough that they wouldn't matter anymore. But Webb had dragged it all back to the surface, not because he'd hurt her. She'd taken worse from actual enemies in actual combat zones, but because he'd made her visible, made her a target. And the worst part was knowing that if she defended herself properly, if she showed even a fraction of what she was trained to do, questions would get asked, her file would get pulled, and the carefully constructed cover story about training liaison duties would collapse. She lay back on the rack and stared at water-stained ceiling tiles. Tomorrow there was a company formation. Captain Reeves was planning something. She'd seen it in his eyes when he'd posted the formation notice. Whatever was coming would force decisions she'd hoped to avoid. For Brooks, she thought, for the promise made in that Helmand compound, that if she survived, she'd try to live as something other than a weapon. She closed her eyes and waited for dawn. The company formation assembled at 0600 on a Thursday that came in cool and overcast. 140 Marines stood in ranks on the company parade deck, while Captain Reeves paced in front with his hands clasped behind his back. He was 38, a prior enlisted Force Recon Marine who'd earned his commission the hard way, and he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who'd led men in actual combat rather than just training exercises. He didn't waste time on speeches, said that certain behaviors had come to his attention that violated basic standards of discipline and respect, said those behaviors would be addressed through immediate action. Then he announced a leadership evaluation exercise starting immediately, a compressed 3-day field assessment that would test everything from land navigation to tactical decision-making under pressure. Results would become permanent service records and would influence future assignments and promotions. Then Reeves looked directly at Webb and said he expected Lance Corporal Webb to volunteer, given how vocal he'd been about standards and warrior culture. Webb's face flushed, but he couldn't back down in front of the entire company. He stepped forward. Reeves asked for 9 more volunteers. 7 Marines stepped up immediately, all junior NCOs and senior lance corporals looking to prove themselves. Then Reeves turned to Taskin, who was standing in the back rank in her Navy working uniform, and said he was specifically requesting Petty Officer First Class Taskin participate as both evaluator and participant, since her personnel file indicated instructor-level qualifications in small unit tactics from previous joint training assignments. The formation went dead silent. Webb looked like he'd been struck. Taskin kept her face neutral and stepped forward without hesitation.
The assessment started at 800 hours. First evolution was a 12-mile tactical movement with full combat load across varied terrain, swamp, pine forest, open ground, with simulated casualty scenarios requiring proper carries and treatment. Webb led out aggressively, pushing a hard pace to establish dominance. Taskin stayed in the middle of the pack, moving with the kind of efficient economy that comes from carrying weight across hostile terrain, where speed means survival. By mile 8, 3 Marines had dropped out. Webb was still pushing, but his form was deteriorating. Shoulders hunched, stride shortened, breathing ragged. Taskin hadn't altered pace once.
Second evolution was a tactical problem-solving exercise. They were given a notional building clearance scenario with limited intelligence and told to plan and execute. Webb immediately tried to take charge, started issuing orders based on action movies rather than doctrine, treating it like a Hollywood sequence. Taskin observed for 2 minutes, then quietly asked the evaluators if she could make a recommendation. They told her to proceed. She sketched a plan in the dirt with a stick, proper room clearing sequences that minimized exposure, covering fire positions that created overlapping fields of fire, phased movement that maintained security throughout. She referenced tactics straight from the Marine Corps and Army urban operations manuals, explained fatal funnels and angles of attack, laid it out with the kind of precision that came from planning real operations where mistakes meant body bags. Webb tried to argue, but Staff Sergeant Morris, acting as senior evaluator, told him to execute Taskin's plan. It worked flawlessly. The scenario was completed without a single simulated casualty.
Third evolution, designed specifically to break people, came on day 2. Combat casualty care under stress. Multiple simulated casualties requiring immediate treatment, limited supplies, active simulated hostile fire using blank ammunition and pyrotechnics. Most participants froze or made critical errors, wrong tourniquet placement, incorrect airway management, failure to prioritize by severity. Taskin moved like she'd done this in actual combat, because she had. Triaged by injury severity rather than proximity. Applied tourniquets with proper placement and tension while directing covering fire with verbal commands. When Webb panicked and tried to apply a vented chest seal without checking for tension pneumothorax, she corrected him calmly, showed him how to position the seal while the casualty exhaled, explained monitoring for tension signs, demonstrated the burping technique if pressure built. All standard TCCC procedures she'd performed under actual fire in Helmand Province. The evaluators, Staff Sergeant Morris and Gunnery Sergeant Ortiz, a former MARSOC Marine, watched with increasingly narrowed eyes. Ortiz pulled Captain Reeves aside during a water break and said something that made Reeves nod slowly.
Final evolution was a 24-hour patrol-based defense where participants had to maintain security, conduct planning, and manage leadership rotations without sleep. By hour 18, Webb was making critical errors. By hour 22, his tactical decisions would have gotten his entire team killed in a real scenario. Taskin stayed sharp throughout, rotated personnel efficiently, and caught mistakes before they cascaded. When the assessment ended at dawn on day 3, only 4 of the original 10 were still functional. Webb was among them, barely. Taskin looked ready to continue indefinitely.
Reeves called everyone to the parade deck for the debrief. Standing behind him was a Navy commander nobody recognized, wearing service dress white, with a chest full of ribbons that told stories about places and operations that never made the news. Commander Elizabeth Whitaker was 52, with iron gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and the kind of quiet intensity that made Taskin's spine straighten involuntarily. She wore Naval Special Warfare insignia and ribbons that included multiple bronze stars with V device, a silver star, and several classified operation citations that appeared as generic service ribbons to anyone who didn't know the system.
Whitaker didn't introduce herself with pleasantries. She asked Captain Reeves to dismiss everyone except the assessment participants and the evaluating NCOs. Once the parade deck cleared, she walked directly to Taskin and asked her to turn her head to the left. Taskin complied. The crescent-shaped scar on her left forearm became visible in the early morning light. Whitaker nodded once, then turned to address the exhausted Marine standing at attention. She said she was going to tell them about an operation that had been classified until recently, but was now cleared for training discussion purposes. She asked if anyone recognized the designation Operation Crosswind. Nobody did. Webb looked confused and angry and half dead from 3 days without sleep. Whitaker explained that Crosswind was a joint JSOC operation conducted in Helmand Province in 2021. A 4-person SEAL element and 1 Navy intelligence specialist have been inserted to extract a high-value target with intelligence on an imminent large-scale attack against U.S. forces in Kabul. The mission was compromised when local militia forces surrounded the compound and cut off all extraction routes. The team held defensive positions for 72 hours against numerically superior forces with limited ammunition and no air support. All 5 operators survived. The HVT was successfully extracted. The intelligence prevented an attack that would have killed over 200 American personnel. She paused. Let that information settle. Then she said the Navy intelligence specialist on that operation had been cryptologic technician first class Vera Taskin,
who had spent the previous 6 years attached to JSOC intelligence detachments, supporting naval special warfare operations in denied areas across 3 continents. The parade deck went silent, except for wind in the pine trees. Whitaker continued, said that Petty Officer Taskin had conducted direct action support missions, provided tactical intelligence under fire, trained SEAL elements in communication security and counter-surveillance techniques, and personally participated in operations that had saved hundreds of American lives. Said the scar on her forearm was from a breaching charge accident during the Helmand operation. Said she'd been awarded classified citations that couldn't appear in her official record. She said Taskin had requested rotation to conventional duty after her SEAL team leader was killed in Ramadi, and that her transfer had been processed through special channels to maintain operational security about her previous assignments.
Webb's face had gone white. The other Marines stared at Taskin like they were seeing her for the first time. Whitaker turned back to Taskin and asked why she'd requested transfer out of the JSOC detachment to do administrative liaison work at a Marine base. Her tone wasn't accusatory, just direct. Taskin spoke for the first time in 3 days. Said she'd lost her team leader. Said she'd made a promise to try living a different life. Said she wanted to be done operating in places that didn't officially exist. Whitaker nodded like she understood completely. Then she said that based on Taskin's performance during the assessment, Captain Reeves had submitted a request for her permanent assignment as a combat instructor with the Marine Corps Martial Arts Program at Quantico. Full instructor billet, teaching the next generation of Marines and sailors tactical movement, close-quarters combat, and survival techniques in urban environments. No more administrative work, no more hiding who she was. She asked if Taskin would accept the assignment. Taskin looked at the other Marines, at Webb, who couldn't meet her eyes, at Staff Sergeant Morris, who gave a slight nod of respect, at the evaluators who'd watched her work for 3 days and recognized something they'd seen before in other operators. She thought about Brooks, about the promise made in that Helmand compound, about whether teaching people to survive qualified as redemption. She said yes. Whitaker shook her hand, said the orders would be processed within the week. Then she dismissed the formation and left without ceremony, leaving Taskin standing alone on the parade deck while the sun finally broke through the overcast.
Webb submitted a request for transfer to a different company. Within 48 hours, Captain Reeves approved it without comment, but added a formal counseling statement to Webb's record documenting the incident and the assessment results. The paperwork would follow him. Word spread through the battalion faster than any official communication could travel. The quiet Navy petty officer Webb had assaulted in the mess hall was a confirmed JSOC operator with a classified service record that made most combat deployments look like training exercises. Taskin spent her final 2 weeks at Camp Lejeune out processing and preparing for transfer. Marines who'd ignored her before now nodded in passageways. Staff Sergeant Morris bought her coffee at the post exchange and asked careful questions about Helmand that she answered in vague terms that confirmed enough without violating her NDA. The base sergeant major personally thanked her for her service during a chance encounter outside the base gym. On her final morning at Lejeune, she found an envelope slipped under her barracks door. Inside was a handwritten note from Webb. 3 sentences. Said he was sorry. Said he'd let his insecurity turn him into someone he didn't respect. Said he was submitting a package for Marine Raider assessment and selection because he wanted to earn the right to call himself a warrior instead of just assuming the title. Taskin read it twice, then filed it in her personal effects. She didn't need his apology, but she respected that he'd written it anyway.
The drive to Quantico took 6 hours through Carolina back roads and Virginia highways. She reported to the Marine Corps Martial Arts Program on a Monday morning that smelled like fresh-cut grass and possibility. Master Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Coyle, the senior instructor with 3 Fallujah tours and a shelf full of close-quarters combat credentials, shook her hand and said he'd read her actual service record, not the cover story, but the real one that required special clearances to access.
Said they didn't get many JSOC intelligence operators rotating through instructor billets. Said he was looking forward to learning from her. Her first class was 23 Lance Corporals, fresh from the School of Infantry, all of them young and confident in the way new Marines always are. She stood in front of them in the training bay wearing a plain instructor's uniform with her petty officer rank insignia and her scarred dive watch and nothing else that would indicate her history. She introduced herself, said she'd spent time in Helmand and Yemen and a few other places they might have heard about, said she was going to teach them how to survive situations where most people died, said the training would be hard but fair, and anyone who completed her course would have skills that could save their lives and the lives of their teammates. Then she told them to partner up and get ready to work because words were easy and the only thing that mattered was what you could do when everything went to hell. She thought about Brooks while they trained, about Yemen and Helmand, about the promise made in that compound while they'd waited to see if dawn would come. Maybe this was how you kept that kind of promise, by passing it forward to the next generation.